In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Welcome to the Abracast. I'm your host, returning finally, John Towers here at your service. Welcome to my little journal, my little log to the future and to whoever, detailing the fall of Western civilization. It's kind of what the show's become. And here today, I'm going to be talking about something I've been threatening to. I've definitely used to threaten to talk about it all the time, like in my early episodes. And it's just become more and more and more prominent and important. And as the political blah, blah, blahs have been developing and whatever over the last 5 years now, I believe it's still something important that I'm not going to just dodge anymore. I have a neat little angle into it, and we're going to be talking about it. And that is, I used to threaten all the time to explain fascism. Now, you read through like something like the Encyclopedia Britannica and their definition of fascism, which we're going to be doing a little bit here this evening. You're going to find out that it's not there's no detail oriented, like, specific thing. Every historian, probably because of their political leanings one way or the other, psst, pinkos, psst. Can't seem to get their head around agreeing with a definition of fascism. Therefore, in the modern world, with a bunch, we live in a population of people who are uneducated, don't think about stuff, just nod to their YouTube videos, and that's the end of it. We live in a world of people like that who don't understand the word fascism, and I have a high level tier 1 example of this, and we're going to bounce it against something that's near and dear to my heart to kind of try to at least disprove this dunce. And I'm getting ahead of myself. I know that George Lopez did not write the Blue Beetle. I know that he probably did not write the Blue Beetle, but he uttered the words, the shot heard across my planet, my universe. So I feel like I'm getting a little out of control already. So before we get started, I want to let you know that I do have my vessel of the art here. It's standing by, and held within my vessel of the art is the weapon of mass distraction, the formula for the Jinn Jihad, followed to a T, to the letter. And with any party, we should get it started off right. So here you go. All right, so what the fuck am I talking about? This, my friends, is what I'm talking about. Unfortunately, we're going to listen to the whole thing, but we only need to listen to the last couple seconds. So tune out. Look at your phone. I don't know what you did, but just come back in the last couple seconds of this video, of this clip here. This is for the upcoming movie Blue Beetle, which this is not my Blue Beetle. my Blue Beetle's name was Ted Cord, and he was an Egyptianologist. But, however, I do know that this is the Blue Beetle of the generation of people who are, I don't know, watching DC stuff for the last probably 20 years or something. So I'm not mad that he's, I should put this up front nowadays, I guess. I'm not mad that Jaime Reyes is a Latino. I'm not mad at that. I'm not mad at Blue Beetle being, tokenized or whatever as Latino. What this movie looks pretty much like garbage. This looks like a superhero movie from 8 years ago. You know what I mean? Like they've moved on past this, but now this is, whatever. I can't get stuck in the critiques of these things because I need to get through. Anyhow, don't get me wrong. I'm not mad that George Lopez is in this movie. Or that they're Hispanic people. That's just the character nowadays or whatever. And George Lopez is like one of these comedians who's like, he just keeps failing sideways. Like they just keep giving him TV shows to ruin, I guess, or fail at, I guess. They're like, now let's make him a teacher, and now let's make in the next one let's make him a farmer. Like, what was the Seinfeld? He'll run a circus. The next one. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the DCU's trailer for Blue Beetle.
Yes. You finished scraping the gum off that lounger or what?
Everything right now feels so out of reach.
You always land on your feet, bro. You're Jaime.
They don't get out much. Jenny?
God, that's your wife. But do not open it.
You went in to get us jobs, and all you brought back was a hamburger?
Okay, I don't think it's a burger.
You haven't looked?
What the hell is that?
It's a Blue Beetle robot. Scary.
How did you get it to do that?
I don't think I should
He
narrate
likes
this.
me.
So that was my favorite part of the trailer. It's where George Lopez tries to get the robot beetle off Jaime Reyes' face, and it blasts him into the corner of the room.
Jaime.
This ain't what you want. This ain't what you want. This ain't what you want. What the?
Host acquired.
Who said that? Okay, it's gonna be okay!
And so they rip off every Superman movie where the Blue Beetle flies into the atmosphere and he's looking over the Earth.
Space.
Re-entry systems ready.
Wait, no.
This ain't what you
And then they rip off Iron Man where he falls from outer space.
want. This ain't what you want.
And then they rip off Spider-Man where he gets caught at the last minute from falling from a great height.
What is going on?
I just wanna rock.
It's called the Scarab. It's some kind of world-destroying weapon.
And then they rip off Shang-Chi where they cut a bus in half. God, why would you? Why, if every movie you have disposal to rip off, why would you rip that one off?
Designed to protect its host.
This ain't what you want.
Sometimes it does what you want, and sometimes...
And then they rip off Deadpool where it's moving in slow motion except for him because he's looking around.
It doesn't.
I think I cut a bus in half.
The Scarab chose you, but it belongs to me.
That love you feel for your family makes you weak. I just wanna rock.
And then George Lopez is driving around what looks like Ted Cord's Beetle ship, Beetlecopter, whatever. Beetlemobile?
The universe has sent you a gift, and you have to figure out what you're gonna do with it.
Whatever you can imagine, I can create.
Let's party.
Nice choice.
I just wanna
Here it comes.
It's like Batman stuff.
Batman's a fascist.
That's it. I subjected you to that whole thing just so you could listen to that. So let's do it again.
It's like Batman stuff.
Batman's a fascist.
Okay, so those of you guys that have listened to the show for a long time, it seems like this is going to be like a theme for the evening, talking about shit that I talk about on other shows, maybe. So anyhow, I've explained to you, I love my dad. I do. At one point in time, I thought he was the fucking smartest guy in the world. And if you ever played Jeopardy or Trivia Pursuit with him, you might too. Anyhow, but the other side of my dad is that he's a crazy socialist. Like, I think the last time I talked about him on the show, I described him as a Mao Zedong, a Maoist red socialist. And the weird thing about all this is he's also a Batman fanatic. On his car, on his fucking wallet, on his fucking belt buckle, on every t-shirt that he owns is a Batman shirt. He walks down the street of his hometown and people go, "Yo, Batman!" Like, he's a fucking crazy Batman guy. Every year it's easy to shop for him. What kind of batarangs can I find on eBay? Can I find a Batman walkie-talkie for him? Fucking utility belts and fucking grappling hooks and all this stuff. So we stopped talking politics a dozen years ago. We don't talk politics at all. So what we do is we talk comic books, and specifically comic book movies. So I called him and I'm like, I'm interested to see what he's going to say about this Blue Beetle thing, because he can't believe Batman's a fascist. Like, he just can't. Remember, crazy leftist, Saul Alinsky, fucking Noam Chomsky reading, fucking motherfucker. So I was like, yeah, would you see the Blue Beetle thing? And he was like, oh, I saw that there was a trailer, but I didn't watch it. And I'm like, oh, well, you got to watch it, and you got to watch it to the end. I'm curious to see what you have to say about it. And he goes, why? What happens? And I'm like, George Lopez calls Batman a fascist. And he's like, what? No, what? And then I'm talking, and I could hear him I could hear his gears grinding in the background. And he was like, well, he kind of is a fascist. And I'm like, oh, God, no. What? No. So because of that conversation, this trailer, and my promise to you 5 years ago, tonight, we're going to be talking about what is a fascist. And we're going to actually be bumping it against The Dark Knight Returns, which is I don't care what you say, it's the definitive Batman story. And you can tell because every fucking thing that they're doing, the DCU and all that stuff, it just cannibalizes it at every bit. And the last thing was this Batman versus Superman movie, which was, in my opinion, a giant failure because it misses the point of like everything. It misses the point of everything, and they steal a bunch of spots from the book we're going to be talking about. But so I just want to build up. I want to give you some context and stuff about why we're actually talking about this. So I mentioned the Encyclopedia Britannica, and it's kind of like an all over the place sort of definition of fascism. And I can't read the whole thing. It's a very long article, but I am going to go through and just touch some stuff. I'm not going to be getting into historical precedent. I'm not a political science guy. And then we're going to bounce over to this other book, and I'm going to read a pretty lengthy spiel from it, and then we're going to get into The Dark Knight, and I'm going to try to make my case that one of the big themes in The Dark Knight Returns is fascism, and probably not in the way that you think about it. Definitely not in the way that my old man thinks about it. So here we go. Encyclopedia Britannica, or just Britannica.com. Fascism is a political ideology and mass movement that dominated many parts of Central, Southern, and Eastern Europe between 1919 and 1945, and that also had adherents in Western Europe, the United States. What? The United States! Yes, but not in the way that this article talks about it. South Africa, Japan, Latin America, and the Middle East. Europe's first fascist leader, Benito Mussolini, El Duce, took the name of this party from the Latin word fasces, which refers to a bundle or elm of birch rods. So remember that the modern Planet of the Apes movie, where the smart ape breaks one stick, but then gets a bunch of sticks, and he's apes strong together. This is the whole point of fascism. It's stronger together, but probably not in the way that you're it's thought when it's talked as about fascism. Although fascist parties and movements differed significantly from one another, they had many characteristics in common, including, in going forward in our conversation, this is not mutually exclusive, including extreme militaristic nationalism. There was a Carlin bit, probably from the 80s or 90s, where he's talking about when fascism comes to America, and he's like, it's going to be happy. It's going to all be happy fascism. It's going to be happy fascism. Carlin was astute to understand that fascism doesn't have to be about extreme militaristic nationalism. The book that we're going to be talking about next, which is, I don't know what happened to this guy. He became a lunatic, but he wrote this really great book called, his name is Jonah Goldberg, and he wrote this book called Liberal Fascism, The Secret History from American Left, from Mussolini to the Politics of Meaning. He explains that this militaristic nationalism can be talked about as Hitlerism or Mussoliniism, and it's not it could be a symptom or a part of the fascist movement, but it's not the definitive part of the fascist movement. It's the way that he explains it is it was the easiest model to push around their culture, their population. Militarism was the easiest way to get everyone organized, right? Where nowadays that might not be so true, as we're seeing with the Twitter files and the very thin veil between the FBI and the CIA and Facebook and Twitter and blah blah, yada 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 yada. So an electoral democracy, the political and cultural liberalism, a belief in a social hierarchy and the rule of elites. Think about that one. The rule of elites. Think about it today. And the desire to create the Volksgemeinschaft, or the people's community, in which individual interest would be subordinated to the good of the nation. At the end of World War II, the major European fascist parties were broken up, and in countries such as Italy and Germany, they were officially banned beginning in the late 40s. However, many fascist-oriented parties and movements were founded in Europe, as well as Latin America, South Africa, although some European neo-fascist groups attracted large followings, blah, blah, blah. National fascism. So here, there's a lengthy thing talking about national fascism, which I kind of just addressed however I wanted to a moment ago. Scrolling down. Common characteristics of a fascist movement. There has been considerable disagreement among historians and political scientists about the nature of fascism. Some scholars, for example, regard it as a socially radical movement with ideological ties to the Jacobins of the French Revolution, whereas others see it as an extreme form of conservatism. This bit, to me, it gets confusing because of the difference between the political spectrum here in the States and over in Europe. By the 19th century, backlash against the ideas of the Enlightenment, some find fascism deeply irrational, whereas others are impressed with the rationality in which it serves the material interests of its supporters. So this is why, like, Hitler was Time's Man of the Year in 1938, is because people looked at what he was doing. You know, these folks were kind of living through like a reboot of this, where experts and academics are kind of in charge of us. They're in charge of us. And if you don't believe that's true, think about what Anthony Fauci did to us for the last 3 years. He's not an elected official. He's a bureaucrat. Think about what he did. Think about what he did to us. Think about whatever you think about climate people. Think about like all the experts in the climate change world are doing. Think about what they're doing to our cars and with the EVs in the future, and the fucking they're stopping making the Camaro because of this shit. Like, I mean, it's crazy. It's this expert class, you know, and this has its kind of roots. At least somewhat here in this definition that we're talking about. Think about, I mean, okay, I'm not going to get into that. Some attempt to explain fascist demiologies as the expression of irrational, misdirected anger and frustration, whereas others emphasize the rational ways in which these were used to perpetuate professional and class advantages. All right, I'm skipping down. I'm already running a little bit behind. So here is something that sticks to this day: opposition to Marxism. So this is why we get, as a culture, give Antifa such wide berth. You know, when we say to ourselves, you know, let's punch a Nazi day. I'm like Indiana Jones, guys. I'm gonna punch a Nazi. I'm like Captain America. I'm gonna punch a Nazi. You know, which are things that we've all seen in our feeds over the last few years. The reason that that's there, I did a big interview. I can't remember the guy's name. Anyhow, I'm drunk already. We did a big interview, and we talked about the Black Bloc and Antifa and stuff back then, and we were talking about like, well, fascists and socialists fight each other. They fought each other historically all the time. So if you're out there going, I'm going to punch a Nazi, it doesn't make you a fucking good guy. If you're Antifa, because fascism and Marxism are natural competitors. They'll call it the third way. We'll get into it when we talked about the third way and the fourth way when we talked about Alexander Dugin a few months ago. The opposition to parliamentary democracy. Well, we know that they're actually hijacking parliamentary democracy. The opposition to political and cultural liberalism. Okay, well, totalitarian ambitions. Conservative economic programs. I don't know how. Let's read into that, because I don't know how that. There were few very small fascist movements whose social and economic goals were left or left-centrist. Hendrik de Man in Belgium and Marcel Detat in France, both former socialists, were among those who hoped to eventually achieve a fairer distribution of wealth by appealing to the fascist nationalism and the class conciliation in Poland in the camp of national radicalism. Obaz Nordado Ralakimi supported land reforms and national. Here it is. This is why I wanted to read this part. This guy supported land reforms and the nationalization of industry, and fascists in Libya and Syria advocated Arab socialism. So this bit about the nationalization of industry is what I wanted to kind of highlight. And that takes us to this other concept here called corporatism. The fascist economic theory, corporatism, called for organizing each of the major sectors of industry, agriculture, professions, and the arts into state or management-controlled trade unions and employer associations or corporations, each of which would negotiate labor contracts and working conditions and represent the general interest in their professions in a larger assembly of corporations or the corporatist parliament. Corporatist institutions would replace all independent organizations of workers and employers. Land and corporatist parliaments would replace, at least exist alongside traditional representatives and legislative bodies. In theory, the corporatist model would represented a third way between capitalism and communism, allowing for harmonious corporation of workers and employers for the good of the nation as a whole. In practice, fascist corporatism was used to destroy labor movements and suppress political dissent in 1936. So I think I'm done with this. But it's important here that this is not apples to apples. Remember, every time this creeps up, it changes a little bit. It's like a Rubik's Cube. It's like a transformer. So here, where they're talking about in Germany, they destroyed and suppressed labor movements. Here, they are using them because they are changing Democrats. They're changing what it means to be a liberal. Far away are the times of classical liberalism. And I would say that we are unmoored from the John F. Kennedy liberalism of the Democratic Party. Here they took it over somehow. They took it over because there's a crony aspect to it where they're kicking back money and they're ideologically lined up. It's the same way with what they're doing with the public square, right? Twitter and Facebook and all this other kind of stuff. All these intelligence guys and law enforcement people are going and getting jobs in Facebook and Twitter and Google and back and forth and back and forth. And when you read Schoenberger's or Taibbi's or Barry Weiss's articles on the Twitter files, you'll see that there's this where someone in the FBI can just email someone at Facebook and be like, yo, you should censor this person. You should take this person off. This is that third way that we're talking about. It's not being ran through a union, or there's no overseer or someone. There's no person with the red phone sitting at their desk saying, you censor this person. They've figured out how to do it with the culture at these places. And I'm not so interested in the debate on whether Facebook or Twitter is the new public forum. I think that's obvious. And if you would try to argue that, I would think that you're not being genuine or in good faith. It's obvious that, these things are where we are. Like, no one is gathering in it. Literally, people don't go to town squares. People don't stand on soapboxes in the corner and talk about taxation without representation anymore. No, everyone does it online in these social media platforms. Also, as I've pointed out time and time again, and no one really talks about it, and it kind of frustrates me a little bit, is Google, Facebook, Twitter maybe not, I don't know, but Google and Facebook and all that stuff started off being as Department of Defense projects, and they were subsidized by the government. So even if that's not the case, and censorship should be legal because of the NFL or whatever the fuck you dingbats are thinking, like, the fact is that if public money went into them, then they should be covered by whatever the First Amendment. So, with that being said, this thin viscous layer between, the government and these Facebook or Twitter or Google people that actually, even if you even read Schellenberger's, it's actually even Wikipedia is involved in this, where people just send an email going, hey, I don't like the way this guy's saying. Even if you're like, this isn't about all of that. I'm just trying to point out, modern day fascism, I guess, is what I'm looking for. Down the hatch. We'll move on, but just to plug up this Britannica.com article, one of the other concepts is the alleged equality of social status, the discourse of the fascist economic problems related to large disparities of wealth. So, how many times have we heard that? All this class warfare stuff. Mass mobilization. Fascists characteristically attempted to win popular support and consolidate their power by mobilizing the population in mass meetings, parades, and other gatherings. So this is something that, instead of an actual physical parade with swastikas marching up and down, instead, we're all glued to our virtual parade, our little echo chamber bubble that's being controlled by, the Zuckerbergs of the universe and all of this stuff. And they have the leadership principle, and here's just something new. This is like one of those inversion maybe concepts, like the something along the lines of the labor unions is the new man. Fascists aimed to transform ordinary men into the new man, a virile being who would put decadent bourgeoisie, cerebral Marxists, and feminine liberals to shame. The new man would be physically strong and morally hard, admiring what was forceful and vigorous, and despising everything weak and soft. So, nowadays it seems like we're pushing for that weakness and we're in that softness everywhere. Right? Does anyone have any Bud Light handy? So I'm going to flip over to this. I am really behind schedule. I'm going to flip over to this Jonah Goldberg liberal fascism book, A Secret History of the American Left from Mussolini to the Politics of Meaning. And we're just going to creep in here. And like I said, Jonah Goldberg has since lost his mind. But this is a really good book. This book helped me. When did it come out? In 2007. Ask the average reasonably educated person what comes to mind when she hears the word fascism. The immediate responses are, of course, dictatorship, genocide, anti-Semitism, racism, and, of course, right wing. Delve a bit deeper and move a bit further to the left, and you'll hear a lot about eugenics and social Darwinism, state capitalism, or the sinister role of big business. War, militarism, and nationalism will also come up a lot. Some of these attributes were indisputably central to what we might call classical fascism, or the fascism of El Duce, Benito Mussolini, and the Nazism of Adolf Hitler. Otherwise, like the widely misunderstood term social Darwinism, it has little to do with fascism, but very few of these things were unique to fascism, and almost none of them were distinctly right-wing or conservative, at least in the American sense. To begin with, one must be able to distinguish between the symptoms and the disease. Consider militarism, which will come up again and again. Militarism was indisputably central to fascism and communism. No one likes to talk about that part, and countless countries, but it has a more nuanced relationship with fascism than one might suppose. For some thinkers in Germany and United States, such as Teddy Roosevelt or Oliver Wendell Holmes, war was truly the source of important moral values. This was militarism as a social philosophy, pure and simple. But for far more people, militarism was a pragmatic expedient, highest and best means for organization or organizing social. God damn it! I'm sorry. The highest, best means for organizing society in productive ways, inspired by ideas like those in William James' famous essay, "The Moral Equivalent to War." Militarism seemed to provide a workable and sensible model for achieving desirable ends. Mussolini, who openly admitted to evoking James, used this logic for his famous quote "Battle of the Grains" unquote. Another sweeping social initiatives. Such ideas had immense following in the United States, with many leading progressives championing use of industrial armies to create ideal workers' democracy. Later, FDR, Civilian Conservation Corps, as a militaristic a social program as one can imagine, borrowed from these ideas, as did JFK's Peace Corps. This trope has hardly been purged from contemporary liberalism. Every day we hear about the war on cancer and the war on drugs and the war on poverty and exhortations to make this and that social challenge the moral equivalent of war. From healthcare to gun control to global warming, liberals insist that we need to get beyond the politics and put ideological differences behind us in order to do the people's business. Don't kill grandma, just stay inside for 2 weeks. Stay safe. These experts and scientists know what we do are told, therefore the time for debate is over. This, albeit in a nicer and more benign form, is the logic of fascism. It was on ample display in the administrations of Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, and yes, even John F. Kennedy. Then, of course, there's racism. Racism was indisputably central to Nazi ideology. Today, we are perfectly comfortable with equating racism and Nazism and the important respects. It's absolutely appropriate, but why not equate Nazism and, say, Afrocentrism? Many early Afrocentrists like Marcus Garvey were pro-fascist or openly identifying themselves as fascist. The Nation of Islam has surprising ties to Nazism, and its theology is Himmler-esque. The Black Panthers, a militaristic cadre of young men dedicated to violent separatism and racial superiority, are as quintessentially fascist as Hitler's brown shirts or Mussolini's action squads. And the Afrocentrist writer Leonard Jeffries' blacks are sun people and whites are ice people could easily be mistaken for Nazi theorists. Certain quarters of the left assert that Zionism equals racism and the Israelis are the equivalent to Nazis. As invidious as and as problematic as those comparisons are, why aren't we hearing more demunitions of groups raging from the National Council of La Raza, that is, quote, the race, to the radical Hispanic group Mecca, whose motto, por la raza todo, foro de la raza nada, means everything for the race and nothing for outside the race. Why is it that when a white man spouts such sentiments, it's objectively fascist, but when a person of color says the same thing, it's merely an expression of fashionable multiculturalism? The most important priority for the left is to not offer any answer at all to such a question. Yo, man, Batman's fascist. They would much prefer to maintain Orwell's definition of fascism as anything not desirable, thus excluding their own fascistic proclivities from inquiring eyes when they are forced to answer. However, they will respond. The response is usually more instinctive, visceral, and dismissively mocking than rational or principled. Their logic seems to be multiculturalism, the Peace Corps are such good things that liberals approve of, and good things can't be fascist by simple virtue of the fact that liberals approve of them. Indeed, this seems to be the irreducible argument of countless writers who glibly use the word fascist to describe the, quote, bad guys, unquote, based on other criteria that liberals think they are bad. Fidel Castro, one could argue, is a textbook fascist because the left approves of his resistance to U.S. imperialism and because he can use the abracadabra words of Marxism. It's not just wrong, but objectively stupid to call him fascist. Meanwhile, calling Ronald Reagan, George Bush, Rudy Giuliani, and other conservatives fascists is simply right thinking. It's what sophisticated people do. The major flaw in all of this is that fascism, properly understood, is not a phenomenon of the right at all. Instead, it is, and has always been, a phenomenon of the left. This fact is inconvenient truth, if there ever was one. It's obscured in our time by the equally mistaken belief that fascism and communism are opposites. In reality, they are closely related, historical competitors for the same constituents seeking to dominate and control the same social space. The fact that they appear as polar opposites is a trick of intellectual history. And more to the point, the results of a concentrated propaganda effort on the part of the Reds to make the Browns appear objectively evil and other. Ironically, demonization of the other is continued as a differential trait of fascism, but in terms of their theory and practice, the differences are minimal. Skipping ahead a little bit. Americans like to think of themselves as being immune to fascism while constantly feeling threatened by it. It can't happen here is a common refrain, but fascism definitely has a history in this country, and that is what this book is about. The American fascist tradition is deeply bound up with the effort to Europeanize Americans and give it a modern state that can be harnessed to utopian ends. This American fascism seems and is very different from its European variants because it was moderated by many special factors: geographical size, ethnic diversity, Jeffersonian individualism, a strong liberal tradition, and so on. As a result, American fascism is milder and more friendly, more maternal than its foreign counterparts. It is what George Carlin calls smiley-faced fascism, nice fascism. Best term to describe it is liberal fascism, and this liberal fascism was and remains fundamentally left-wing. This book will present an alternative history of American liberalism that is not only reveals its roots and its commonalities with classical fascism, but also shows how the fascist label was projected onto the right by a complex sleight of hand. In fact, conservatives are the more authentic classical liberals, while the so-called liberals are friendly fascists. All right, I'm going to skip ahead. I need to put an exclamation point on this thing so I can move on to what I really want to talk about. A far more shocking example of the militarization of American life came in the form of the National Recovery Administration, led by Hugh Iron Pants Johnson, Times Man of the Year for 1933. General Johnson was a pugnacious brawler who threatened that Americans who didn't cooperate with the New Deal would... So I should have set this up a little bit. This is FDR's sort of time. The era of FDR... they would get a... General Johnson was a pugnacious brawler who threatened that Americans who didn't cooperate with the New Deal would get a sock in the nose. Come on, let's punch a Nazi. Military liaison to the War Industry Board, which were later called War Industry Board, and director of Americans' first military draft during the Great War, which later called the Great Schooling for the New Deal. Johnson was convinced what America needed was another injection of wartime fervor and fear. Few public figures, Joseph McCarthy included, were more prone to question the patriotism of their opponents. At every opportunity, Johnson claimed that the war on the Depression was indistinguishable from battle. "This is a war lethal and more menacing than any other crisis in our history," he wrote. No sphere of life was out of bounds for this new service. It is women in homes, not soldiers in uniforms, who will this time save our country, he announced. They will go over the top as a great victory as the Argonne. It is 0 hour for the housewives, and their battle cry is, "Buy under the Blue Eagle." The Blue Eagle was the patriotic symbol of compliance that all companies were expected to hang from their doors, along with the motto, "We do our part." Facebook's blue. Twitter's blue. A phrase used by the administration the way the Germans used Gimmelheitsvektorvukawaken, now largely airbrushed from popular awareness. The stylized Indian eagle clutching a band of lightning bolts in one claw and an industrial cogwheel in the other was often compared to the swastika of the German Reich eagle. In both American and German newspapers, Johnson demanded that compliance with the Blue Eagle program be monitored by an army of quasi-official informants under Union members to Boy Scouts. His totalitarian approach was unmistakable. When every American housewife understands that the Blue Eagle on everything that she permits to come into her home is a symbol of its restoration to security, may God have mercy on the man or group of men who attempt to trifle with this bird. It is difficult to exaggerate the propagandistic importance FDR invested in this Blue Eagle. In war, in the gloom of night attack, soldiers wear bright badges on their shoulders to be sure that their comrades do not fire on their other comrades, the president explained. On that principle, those who cooperate with this program must know each other at a glance. In a fireside chat, as Joe Biden will tell you, happened on TV in 1933 to Warner Brothers' musical Footlight Parade starring James Cagney. A chorus line used flashcards to flip up portraits of Roosevelt and then forms a giant Blue Eagle. Will Rogers led a who's who roster of stars in the Blue Eagle and NRA radio broadcasts. So I'm getting too far. So what I'm trying to just talk about is that the point of using this pressure, this governmental pressure, this societal, cultural pressure to get these businesses to do what they wanted to do, and for them to be happy about it. Now we move on. So this is a book that changed my young life. What we're talking about, of course, is The Dark Knight Returns. It came out in, I think, 1986. I remember being a kid listening to my uncle talking about this book to my dad. I had mentioned that my dad was a giant Batman fan, so he's explaining all the intricacies and how awesome this book was. And I wasn't allowed to hang out with them, so I was like hanging out in the living room, but I had the TV turned down so I could like listen, and I'm like, God, this sounds amazing. So we're going to go ahead and get into this book, and not until later did I realize what was up with it, why it struck me so good, but here we go. I'm not doing a whole book report on this. I imagine, I don't know how to do this if I'm not going to do a whole book report on it. So we go through the first couple pages, first couple bits, and Bruce is, I think he's like 55 or 56 at this time. He's been retired from being Batman, and as Stephen King says in the foreword to this book, at least this edition of it, is like, well, in Batman, in the world of Gotham City, everything has changed, but everything is still the same. So it starts with he's trying to passively kill himself in this car race. They have a 2-part cartoon of this out. I have the DVDs. Listen to me, okay, boomer. I have the DVDs, but if you have HBO Max, they're available, and they're pretty good. They miss one of my favorite parts of this book is the internal dialogue, the internal monologue, I should say. So Bruce is always talking to himself in the pages of this book, and some of it is so awesome, and I miss that when I'm watching the movies, the cartoons, and I always wish like there was like an additional like button I could press to get like Peter Weller to do the internal monologue. They blow it and they have him say some stuff out loud because it's so good. But so I'm going to try to stick to it. I'm getting excited already. Getting excited already talking this. But one of the things that we have to talk about going forward at the very beginning of this book is we find out that Arkham Asylum, which we all know is like the depraved lunatic asylum where they house all of Batman's crazy enemies. It has since been renamed. So Batman's been retired for a few years. We'll say 10 years, something like that. But the Arkham Asylum has been named the Arkham Home for the Emotionally Troubled. And the Joker and some of the other famous Batman villains are there, and everything's white, and they're all being tended to by these liberal academic type psychiatrists. And we get into this situation where Harvey Dent, Batman or Bruce Wayne, has paid for a lot of therapy and reconstructive surgery for Harvey Dent, and these two surgeons, a surgeon and the psychiatrist, are like taking the bandages off his face. And they're like, the one guy's like, you know what they say, Harvey, about it's history. Surgical procedures have improved. And Dr. Walper, who's like the insane liberal psychiatrist, is like, as have psychiatric. You're fit to return to society no matter what Septuagint police commissioner says. He's talking about Commissioner Gordon. So Dr. Walper embodies the idea of unrestricted progressivism, unrestricted liberalism. This all the stuff that Dr. Walper's involved in is, well, there's a flash of fame hunting. Like, he's looking for a spotlight, but the main push of his character is, it's like Clockwork Orange. It's like everything that happens in Clockwork Orange is liberalism without constraint. Like, it's just as like, oh, this is a mass murderer. He's killed 2,200 people because he's Harvey Two-Face. I'm just making that part up. he's killed a bunch of 222 people, and now we fixed his face, and I've given him psychiatric help, and we're going to release him out into society, and everything's going to be fine. We're going to see this over and over again with this character, and it ultimately is a gigantic problem because obviously Two-Face isn't fixed. He escapes, and he wreaks havoc everywhere. So that's like the first part that that didn't really have anything to do with fascism, but I find that part fascinating. So going a little bit ways through the book, we're introduced to this character, Carrie Kelly. Now, Carrie Kelly is like this little short. She takes gymnastics in her high school. she's I don't know. She's a daughter of two hippies. And traditionally, Robins are orphans. Up until this point in 86, Dick Grayson was an orphan, famously. Jason Todd was an orphan. And so Carrie Kelly would have been like the third sort of Robin figure in the books. Now later, Tim Drake and I don't know, then they start making everybody gay and black or whatever. But Carrie Kelly winds up becoming she becomes the Robin in this story. She's actually my favorite Robin out of all of them. She's been in a handful of books compared to Jason Todd, compared to Tim Drake, compared to Dick Grayson. But she is my favorite Robin. She's the one that I identify with the most. And we're going to get into why and how that fits into this fascist theme. So she almost gets raped and murdered in this arcade. Batman, I guess, saves her from afar. He just stays up in the rafter and fucks these guys up. And then Batman goes on to be in Batman. Well, Carrie Kelly is freaking out about this, and she is seemingly becomes obsessed with Batman. I'm sure, hopefully, I've noted that Batman's made a return since he was retired, and we get to this point where they start talking about him on the news. And that's when the Joker, who's been catatonic for X amount of years, he wakes up and he's like, "Oh my God, Batman's back! It's time for me to get into some shit again." So he's on. So there's a news story about bats, and we see Jim Gordon is there, and he's overseeing them lighting the bat signal again for the first time in however long. He's trying to get Batman's attention. He wants to set the bat signal out. And you see Carrie Kelly, she's just looking out the window and she's like mopey and she's bored. But the important part of this, to the theme of the story that I'm talking about, is you can hear her parents talking around her or what I should say is totally ignoring her and talking. And they go, obviously, so they're talking about Batman, obviously a fascist, never heard of civil rights. And doesn't the TV just love him? They all love him. The American consciousness died with the Kennedys. Too true. And all the marching we did, it's like that's never happened. And one of them goes, I know. Sometimes I just despair. And then he says, "Give me another hit of that, huh, hun?" So the picture that I paint is that Carrie Kelly's hippie, socialist, leftist parents are sitting there watching TV, smoking pot, bitching about politics, bitching about the politics of Batman. And Carrie Kelly's watching the bat signal light up for the first time in how many years. So it's important that they don't understand fascism. They're calling Batman a fascist. So there's this crazy showdown with Harvey Dent. Joker's trying to get out of prison or the Arkham home for the emotionally disarranged or whatever it is. And we see Carrie Kelly is, she's got her Robin costume assembled and she's putting it on. And she's very proud of herself, and she's jumping from building to building. She's testing out her abilities and her gizmos. And here's Batman. Batman's out there. He's making differences. He's making decisions. He's changing things, and he is not working with the government. He does have brushes with the police, but the police are not instructing him what to do. He does what he's doing, and the cops go with him. And all the while, there's this talk of Jim Gordon retiring. And he's retiring, and this new Ellen Yindel's going to become the new commissioner. I think they got her from Chicago or maybe Cleveland or something. So she's coming in. and she's going to be the new commissioner. And there's this great speech later. Anyhow, I don't want to get hold of myself ahead of myself. So here's Dr. Walper again. He's on a TV show. He's like an expert, and they're talking to them, and the guy goes, "Dr. Walper, you've claimed that the Batman is himself responsible for the crimes he fights. Still, crime rates have shown a steady drop in the week since his return. How do you explain this?" And Dr. Walper is like, "I'm glad you asked me that question, Ted. It is true that this Batman has terrorized the economically disadvantaged and socially maligned, but his effects are far from positive. Picture a public psyche as a vast, moist membrane. Through the media, Batman has struck this membrane a vicious blow, and it has recoiled, and hence your misleading statistics. But you see, Ted, the membrane is flexible and permeable. Here, the more significant aspects of the blow has become calculable, even predictable. To with every antisocial act can be traced to irresponsible media input, giving this the presence of such an aberrant, violent force in the media can only lead to an antisocial programming. Just as Harvey Dent, who's recovering steadily, thanks for asking, assumed the role of ideological doppelganger to the Batman, so a whole new generation of confused and angry will be bent to the matrix of Batman's pathology and delusion. Batman is in context of, and pardon the term, a social disease. So that there we go. And I dismissed Walper's role as it's not part of the fascism, but it is, because we've talked about experts and medical and science people who are totally unmoored, totally giving us the wrong information, totally doing things that are insane. So there's more of Robin, and she's excited, and she's comfortable with her abilities to like jump over stuff and get into things, and so now she's fighting crime. She's shooting firecrackers at muggers and all of this stuff, and this is so hard to do without doing the whole thing. So Batman's fighting this mutant gang leader, and Robin had heard about it on the street, so she shows up and she saves Batman. And here we go. Here's the big thing. After the dump, she saves Batman. She gets him on what's known as the Batmobile. It's a tank. Basically, it's where they got the idea of the tumbler. Like I said, everything takes a lot of modern Batman media just rips this book off. So here we go. We open, there's a big establishing shot of the White House, and there's armed guards in red, white, and blue standing guard at the gates of the White House. And this flag is flying, and this Ronald Reagan-esque president who, I mean, if you agree with the canon of the sequel, is actually Lex Luthor, I guess, in some kind of mind control. I don't know. But he's talking to a mysterious figure. And he says, yes, he says, "Son, I hope you don't mind if I get right down to the brass tacks." And the mysterious figure, dressed in blue and red and yellow, with a cape, says, "Not at all, Mr. President. Your time is precious." And I guess it is at that. "Well, son, I know you like to keep, I like to keep you out of domestic affairs. What with all that ruckus you kick up?" And Clark says, "Yes, sir." "Well, it's this ruckus I would like for you to straighten out for me in Gotham City, just between you and me and this fence post. I was worried about this friend of yours. Here, have a mint." Clark says, "Thank you, sir, but I'm not hungry." I love mints. "Son, I like to think I learned everything I know about running this country from on my ranch. I know it's corny, but I like to think it. And well, it's all good. On a ranch, I mean, for the horses to be different colors and sizes as long as they stay inside the fence. It's even okay to have a crazy bronco now and then. It does the hands good to break them in. But if that bronco up and kicks down the fence and gets those other horses crazy, well, that's bad for business. The world's changed, son. It's not like the old days. I wish it were. I'd give him a medal. You want a medal, son? And Clark says, no, thank you, sir. I love medals. Now, son, I'm not asking you to drag him in, kicking and screaming into the stable. Just settle him down. Ride him around the yard a few times if you have to. And Clark says, sir, I can talk to him, but... Well, I just assured appreciate that and just hate to see things get out of... Well, I just hate that. Give it a shot, son. Your country's counting on you. Yes, sir. And the president says, good boy. I think you see where I'm going. So here we go. Dr. Walper's giving therapy to the Joker, talking about I could get you on to a game. I could get you onto a talk show if you want. The world, it would be good for the world to hear your side of the story. He tells them. So, God, it's so hard to do this without reading through all these good parts. So, they're going to let Joker out to do this talk show. And Clark comes down to talk to Bruce about, what the president told him. And meanwhile, throughout this whole book there's this idea of this island of Corto Maltese, which is like Cuba, where the Soviets are sending missiles to Corto Maltese. And there's a massive Soviet arms buildup there. And so here, this is Bruce and Clark. And they have horses. There's a wolf creeping around and a hawk swooping down, getting rats. And it says there's just the sun in the sky and him, like he's the only reason it's all here. And then he ruins everything by talking. And Clark talks to Bruce. You're not a young man anymore, Bruce. Maybe you learn to slow down and find your niche, but times have changed. Well, now it's not just healthy. You'll burn yourself up. I know. You look better than you have in years, but you're not going to make me come out and say it, are you? Nobody can make you do anything you don't want to do, Clark. Got him. These aren't the old days, Bruce. The world's got no room for... It's like this, Bruce. Sooner or later, someone's going to order me to bring you in, some authority. When that happens, and Bruce says, when that happens, Clark, may the best man win. Now, that's just, hold on a second. And then there's President Reagan on a TV screen. The heroic American troops are now engaged in direct combat with Soviet forces. Now, there's been a lot of loose talk these days about a nuclear war, and Clark goes, I gotta leave. We'll talk later. And Bruce watches them zip off, and he says, no hurry. Back to the president. We'll just tell you, nobody's running off half-cocked, no sir, but we sure are shooting. We're not running away either. We got to secure our, stand up for our cause of freedom. Those cute little Corto Maltese people, they want us there. Just ask them. Meanwhile, don't you fret, we got God on our side, or the next best thing anyway. So Superman goes on the orders of the president to blow up a bunch of Soviet jets and tanks and all this other stuff. And Bruce goes to deal with the liberalism unimpeded of letting the Joker out of the Psychiatric Institute, which goes for a long ways. Finally, the two guys wind up having to fight each other. But before that, there was a Soviet Stormbringer. I think that's what it's called, Coldbringer, Winterbringer. Basically, it's an EMP that knocks out all of the electricity in America, we'll just say. And the government, the local government in Gotham collapses. And what happens is Batman marshals the people to using their sense of civic virtue, of using your sense of civic duty to get the people to get the city under control. So he becomes like a militia movement. So the flip side, the dichotomy that we see here thematically between fascism and whatever we're calling this deal with Batman is the government tells Clark what to do, and Clark does it. It's a public-private partnership. The president tells Clark what to do, and Clark does it. So Batman does what he wants to do, and the local government bends towards his will. What happens, though, is the president gets butthurt because Gotham's the only civilized city after this EMP goes off. So he gets butthurt, and Batman becomes a political liability because of that. You know, here we have the United States government with the closest thing to God on their side, and they can't keep shit straight. And Batman, who's this old man on a horse with a teenage girl and some fucking boomerangs, and they can keep control of their city. And the rest is history. We seen it. Batman and Superman fight, and then they both realize that their mother's name is Martha, and they live happily ever after. If you haven't read this book, read it. At the very least, go get HBO Max and watch the cartoons. Dark Knight Returns. I'm John Towers. I'm sorry this has gone so long. Ugh, Jesus. And yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to say, like, welcome back, and thank you guys for keeping track of me and continuing to listen to the show. Well, I've kind of been on hiatus. I had a little bit of a surgery. I had a robot surgery, and some of you guys know about sort of my depression stuff that's been going on. But I feel like I'm back. I feel like we're doing good. We're being positive. We're on an even keel. I've been spending a lot of time at the range lately. I got all my shit sighted in. I've been really good. So thanks, and thank you guys, and I'll see you soon. Right? I'll see you soon.
Are you interested in the occult, history, conspiracy, and violence? Learn more at abracast.com and visit the storefront for tarot cards, merch, and books. Support the show. Get access to the show archive at subscribestar.com. Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.